I have to say, the whole Israel-Iran war was most definitely something to behold. The moment news got out that Israel had bombed Iran and specifically targeted nuclear scientists and senior military officials, I stayed up way late at night following the whole situation, because apparently international conflicts are the only exciting things in my life, and even then the chuddy curse of nothing ever happening, as always, kicked in. They had a bit of a back and forth like children on a playground until the parents finally intervened. Strangely enough, international conflicts really do start to feel like preschool fights between children. In any case, during that whole fiasco, one idea and proposal emerged from under the water, that of regime change. You'd think that when someone utters that word that you were sent back in time to the Cold War or 2003, but the idea of regime change was floating around a bit, the idea being that the current government of Iran should be overthrown and that Iran should once more become a monarchy prior to the 1979 Islamic Revolution, with Reza Pahlavi, the son of the deposed Mohammed Reza Pahlavi, ascending the throne as the Shah of a new and bright Iran. And you would think that as a self-proclaimed monarchist, I would be enthusiastic about this and support the Pahlavi restoration, right? Well, let's talk a bit about that. Welcome to the 4th episode of Kaffee Klub. Glad you could join us today, where I will be talking about the Pahlavis and why I am not exactly a big fan of them. If you have questions for me and want them to be answered, you can drop a super comment down below worth $5 or more, or make that same donation on my Buy Me a Coffee page with your question. And at the end of every episode, I will be reading out and answering all your questions from the previous one. So, before I get into the current guy himself, I believe I should clarify my position on the Iranian Revolution. Now again, being a monarchist, you would expect me to be a big supporter of the Pahlavis, but my stance on them, at least when talking about Mohammed Reza Shah and his son Reza Pahlavi, is neutral, leaning just slightly towards negative. Actually, I just noticed that the Pahlavis really don't like to get creative with their names. In any case, I will express my opinion on Mohammed Reza Shah and his reforms. I believe, how should I put this? I do think he had a few good ideas and Iran desperately needed some kind of reform, but so to say, he tried to run before he learned to walk, and that is why he inevitably got his ass handed to him in 1979. Let's go over his most important and well-known effort, the secularization of Iran. Now, to some extent, I can understand where he was getting from. He wanted to make Iran more culturally independent and unique by emphasizing the legacy of pre-Islamic Persia and the achievements of figures like Cyrus the Great or Xerxes. Now, as someone who supports cultural and national varieties between different Muslim nations instead of wiping out all differences in favor of one singular unified culture, this was a good effort in my eyes. The most healthy relationship between the present and the past is one where the present acknowledges and celebrates the past, but realizes that it cannot go back and that this era has passed, and they need to work with the cards they have right now in the present. Like, for example, Rome when it was still pagan. Many Christians still love and adore this period of Roman history, but they are obviously not going to become pagans again and abandon their Christian faith. Same thing with ancient Greece and Hellenism. Greeks still proudly say and acknowledge these things as part of their rich history, but they are not going to go back to worshipping Zeus. They are Orthodox Christians now. I believe that the Shah intended something similar in this regard, but he most definitely took things a bit too far, and his efforts were seen as him literally wanting to go back to the old Persia and wipe out the 1,400 years of Persian Islamic history, legacy, and tradition. In the span of less than 50 years, he wanted to completely secularize Iranian society, which was, by the way, still very traditional and religious. He aimed to bring the entire religious establishment under state control, started replacing the calendar with the calendar from the years of Cyrus the Great, proclaimed himself a kind of spiritual leader in the later years, and started arresting and cracking down on clergy members left and right. All of that in a span of less than 50 years. Religion is a very delicate and dangerous minefield to navigate due to its inherent emotional nature and the way people can be attached to a faith. It's not anything like cracking down on a certain political ideology. People live and breathe religion. And certain religions, most notably Abrahamic ones like Islam, Christianity, and Judaism, have a tendency to create a massive whiplash effect if they deem that their faith is being threatened in any direct way. That is why religious fervor goes through the roof in environments where these faiths consider themselves to be persecuted. This is a fact I believe the Shah did not take in mind when going through with his secularization efforts. Instead of starting out small and letting some of his reforms first swim in the water for a decade or so and see what the public reaction was going to be, he went in absolutely guns blazing and tried to have his cake before it was even baked. And the worst part of his efforts was that he didn't just alienate the conservatives in the clergy, but the moderates as well. A lot of the moderates within the clergy were critical of Khomeini, and they actually were against the idea of clerics serving in government positions, like Ayatollah Mohammed Shariat Madari, who strongly advocated for imams and religious organizations to focus on spiritual concerns and not involve themselves in politics. You would think that someone who wanted to secularize a nation would ally himself with these kinds of moderates and push back against the conservatives and increase the influence of the moderates within the ulema, right? Well, apparently not in the Shah's eyes, because his onslaught on the religious establishment and the bazaars forced even the usually apolitical moderates to go against him. They were willing to leave the state alone, but the state did not leave them alone. This left the Shah with pretty much no significant allies within the clergy, except maybe for a couple of imams here and there. And for a society that was still very much religious, this was kind of a problem, as you might imagine. Even if you were a radical secularist, like French laiciste radical, at least start off small step by step. But he just wanted to completely secularize Iran in his lifetime. Now, if he alienated just the clergy and if he made sure to press the right buttons, maybe he could have had a chance to resist their opposition against him. But he just had to go up against the merchants and businessmen as well. You know, the guys with the money in their pockets. The Shah and his Resurgence Party pursued a policy of state capitalism. They set up numerous government-funded and run monopolies and companies, which aimed to industrialize and modernize the Iranian economy. But this policy came at the detriment of the middle class. British consuls even observed that state control of foreign trade hurt private traders and even caused many bankruptcies, with additional income taxes levied upon them. What made the economic situation worse was the influx of people from the countryside to the urban areas due to the agricultural reforms. The new agricultural policy really screwed up land distribution and was favorable towards big landowners. And guess what that led to? It left many peasants with insufficient land and accelerated their migration towards the cities. And if Stalin's Russia has taught us anything, it's that causing a massive influx of peasants into the cities, which did not have the capacity to handle them all, was gonna cause some issues. And then came the war on inflation. Iran suffered a bit of an inflation crisis in the 1970s. You know, nothing major, just residential parts in Tehran seeing a rent increase of 300% in just 5 years, and an average middle-class family spending as much as 50% on housing. You know, nothing big. So, what was the Shah's solution here? Maybe adjust agricultural production to keep up with the rising population, increase interest rates, cut some government spending like the bloated military budget. No, of course not. You go to war against small businesses. Yeah, I am not kidding. He led an anti-profiteering campaign against the businesses due to their price hikes, which, you know, was caused in the first place by the state capitalist policies of the economy. It led to the arrest of many small businessmen, and this prompted many bigger businesses to just transfer capital out of the country. And unironically, There was a state-backed vigilante gang called something like the Inspectorate Team, which was made up of students, and they would go into shops and bazaars, check the prices, and if the owner wasn't complying with the price controls, they would do it mafia style and smash up the place a bit, or just beat the owner themselves. And guess what that led to? Increase in unemployment alongside an inflation crisis. Wait a moment, is Joe Biden the reincarnation of the Shah? Now, to give credit, the then Prime Minister, Jamshid Amuzegar, tried his best to fix it. Particularly, he wanted to skim a few dollars off of the military budget and redirect it towards civilian expenditures. But the Shah was very keen on keeping the military budget as it was, and the state monopolies were not to be touched either. So, Amuzegar had to drastically cut civilian developmental projects instead, which, unsurprisingly, was not helping the situation. So, what did all of this lead to? It led to a lot of the middle class flocking towards the side of Khomeini and his clergymen, who stood besides them against the state's economic centralization. And Khomeini very well knew what kind of advantage he had here, because he leveraged that support from the middle class and other small businessmen to effectively mobilize bazaars across the country, and also secure himself a few generous donations. If it wasn't for the support of the middle class, the Islamic Revolution might as well not have gained enough momentum to become successful. I strongly recommend you all to check out the book Iran Between Two Revolutions by Ervand Abrahamian. All of the things I have said in this section can be found in here, and I will quote the conclusion here on page 533, where the author writes, "The backbone of Khomeini's movement, however, was the traditional middle class, especially the Bazaris and the clergy. He won their staunch allegiance in part because he spoke their language, in part because he appeared to personify the virtues of Imam Ali, courage, honesty, and political astuteness, and in part because the regime, by declaring war on the Bazars and their religious establishment, had driven the moderate opposition and even the apolitical clergy into his arms. The only sectors of the society still independent of the state, the bazaars and the religious establishment, provided Khomeini not only with generous financial support, but also with a nationwide organizational network. In short, by the eve of the revolution, the state had shattered all political parties and silenced their main organs. But it had not yet taken over the bazaars, the mosques, and their pulpits. It was therefore not surprising that the bazaar became the focal point of the revolution." So, is it any surprise then that the Islamic Revolution happened as it did? But Reddit wants you to believe that the mullahs were triggered by girls in skirts and just had to overthrow the government. Just look at this picture of Iran before the Islamic Revolution. But that is not to say everything was bad under the Shah. The bureaucracy and legal system was streamlined and modernized. Surprisingly, a lot of money was allocated to infrastructure projects, and hundreds of schools and hospitals were built across the countryside. I guess in some regards, state capitalism does have its benefits, but I'd say what still at the end of the day makes me sympathetic towards the Shah is that he tried his best to make Iran independent of foreign powers. I am against the idea that he was a Western puppet like Khomeini would have you believe. A lot of the projects he initiated were paid for by the oil royalties he negotiated with the foreign powers as he attempted to gradually bring more of Iran's oil under state control. So, that is something I can always admire. A nation trying its best to break free from foreign influence. So at the end of the day, while I do think the Shah fumbled really hard with the cards he was given, he at the very least had good intentions, even if his methodology could have used some work. So for that, while I would describe myself as more of a critic, he has to some degree earned my respect and sympathy. Something I can absolutely not say for his descendant. And here is the part you've all been waiting for.
Get that ugly, disabled freak away from me. I don't want to look at his fucked up face.
That sums up my feelings towards Reza Pahlavi, and I am not just referring to his stereotypical nose. Rather, it's the fact that he is, in my eyes, a complete sellout. At least his father had the dignity and the dream of making Iran independent, but the apple apparently could not have fallen further from the tree, because his son roams the streets of Tel Aviv at 3 a.m. to suck on some Israeli sausages. Now look, I understand. If you are the victim of a revolution with you ending up exiled and you have ambitions of returning to your home country and crushing the revolution once and for all, and if you have virtually zero support domestically within the country from elite groups, some dicks would have to be sucked, some balls fondled, but at the very least try to preserve the dignity you have left, even if it is a tiny shred. But Reza apparently threw all of this dignity out the window to please his almighty god Bibi. In an interview with the Associated Press in 2017, Reza explicitly said that he did not care with whom he was allying, whether it was the US, Saudis, or the Israelis, as long as they would give him a hand in liberating Iran and putting him back in charge. Realistically speaking, Israel is his only card in the game. Neither the US nor the Saudis want to risk toppling the current regime in Tehran, let alone attempt a grueling ground invasion. It's only really the Israelis who have enough of a bone to pick with Iran where they would consider the prospect of a regime change. And now, consider both the facts that 1. There is no other country in the world he could turn to, and 2. We know what the Israelis are like when it comes to control and favors. They don't do anything for free or out of kindness. So, yeah, the Israelis have him chained up like a dog. And this pic from his Jerusalem visit in April 2023, I think just confirms who is the top in this relationship. He is at the wall and has the little hat on. Apparently, Reza claims that he is a Shia Muslim and, quote, a man of faith. Yeah, both of these things cannot be true at the same time, mind you. He has been very active across almost every major Jewish organization in the United States. In fact, once he was even invited to speak at the conference of presidents of these major American Jewish organizations. I have no idea what the hell he is doing there, and of course he went there begging on his knees for support against the mullahs. And yes, he has also ties to the Anti-Defamation League, as he himself said in an address at the Museum of Tolerance that he directly spoke to them. But you get the point. He is very desperate for any kind of support, and the Jewish/Israeli organizations are the only ones willing to genuinely hear him out. Now, I want to share with you an interesting clip. This was taken from an interview with his father while he was still the Shah of Iran, where the topic of the Jewish lobby in the United States came up. And look what he had to say on the matter.
Why, if this is true, why would the President of the United States pay attention to that lobby?
They are strong.
Strong in what sense?
They are controlling many things.
Controlling what?
Newspapers, medias,
Your Majesty.
banks, finances, and I'm going to stop there.
Well, now wait just a second. You really do believe that the Jewish community in the United States is that powerful? They make the media reflect their view of foreign policy?
Yes.
They do not report, we do not report honestly?
Don't mix things, please. I don't say the media. I say in the media they have people. Not the entire media. Some newspapers will only reflect their views, yes.
No? The New York Times, for instance, is owned by the Salzburger family, who are Jewish. Are you suggesting that the New York Times is biased in its treatment of the question of Zionism, Israel's existence, the United States' relationship with the Arab world?
I will have to put all the articles of the New York Times written on this subject and wrote a conclusion. You can put this to the computer and it will answer you.
What you're saying is that, yes, you do believe.
Well, let's wait for the answer of the computer.
Honestly, I am kinda glad he is dead. Imagine if he witnessed firsthand his son selling out his entire country and legacy to Israeli interests. Again, Apple really did fall far from the tree. But I think what really made me lose even the tiniest bit of respect I had for Reza was something he said a month ago. As we know, Israel initiated its bombing campaign against Iran, with the aim being to take out Iran's nuclear capabilities. And as the world held its breath over what may happen, Reza normally took this opportunity to call for the overthrow of the government. I mean, anybody would have taken this opportunity if they were in his shoes. I don't have a quarrel with that. However, in that campaign against Iran, Israel did a lot more than just target nuclear scientists and senior military officials. Many residential buildings were destroyed, where ordinary people lived, and, as a consequence, plenty of civilians lost their lives. According to the Hrana, which is a non-political NGO human rights advocacy group focusing on Iran, located in the United States, about 417 civilians were confirmed dead, compared to the 268 confirmed military deaths, and the rest of the casualties are unknown in terms of occupation. Genuinely impressive how even when they are specifically targeting military-affiliated individuals, they somehow still rank up a higher civilian body count. Now, as someone who isn't the biggest fan of our greatest ally, I don't think they were deliberately targeting civilians. Rather, they just did not take into account or care about collateral damage. It's not like they care again about their international image. During those bombings, Reza was being interviewed on TV, and the reporter specifically asked him about the civilian deaths and what he had to say in that regard. And oh boy, just look at this footage yourself.
Are you actually saying then that Israel bombing your country, civilians in Iran being killed, is a positive thing?
I'm not saying that the targeting was meant to hurt the Iranian people. The targeting was meant to basically neutralize the regime threat. Clearly, I don't think that it was an intention of the Israeli government to attack Iranian civilians.
He just casually dismisses his own people, his own subjects getting killed like it was nothing. Not even condolences, not even a slight bit of sorrow. How is he not ashamed of himself? Like, okay, the Israelis are his only real backers and he doesn't want to risk angering them. But at the very least, try to be a bit ambivalent about it, like something fog of war, something condolences to the families of civilians, something Israel should probably investigate the scope and what happened and bring the responsible to justice. At least that would give you the appearance that you still sorta care about your subjects while not angering the Israelis too much. But no, he just completely dismisses it and says Israel could not have possibly done something like that. Your father would be ashamed of you. At least he still cared for his people and wanted to see them better off. His methodology was very hit or miss, as I just discussed, but at least there was intention back there to see his people prosper.
I'm not saying that the targeting was meant to hurt the Iranian people. The targeting was meant to basically neutralize the regime threat. Clearly, I don't think that it was an intention of the Israeli government to attack Iranian civilians.
The way I see it, Reza is so desperate to find any sort of support for a Pahlavi restoration in Iran that he is willing to sell his soul to the devil, and if he has to rule over a giant pile of rubble where Iran previously stood, he would gladly do that. And the Israelis, again, we all know what their strategies are like. They know in what position he is in, and that he has no room to make any demands even if he wanted to. If a Pahlavi restoration does happen, the way I see it, Iran would de facto become an Israeli proxy. It's a very big country with a lot of potential in regards to natural resources like oil, and that is why they are so eager to prop him up like that. Again, the Israelis don't do anything for free or out of kindness, and they most certainly are gonna want something big in return. And with the entirety of Iran, there is no telling what they might be up to. So for that reason, I just can't support a restoration of the Pahlavis. In the pursuit of some backer who would restore them on their thrones, they have effectively sold off their family and legacy to foreign interests. Maybe I'm mistaken somewhere. Maybe Reza is doing a 900 IQ Machiavellian play to get back in charge, and immediately he's gonna destroy Israeli influence or something. But considering the fact that his daughter married a Jewish venture capitalist named Bradley Sherman, who pretty much became the very first Jew within the royal family, I kinda doubt that. Also, the funniest part about that marriage is that they unironically played Hava Nagila during their wedding. No, I am not joking. And also, don't mistake my dislike for the Pahlavis as an endorsement of the mullahs in Tehran. For me, it is a trash versus garbage competition. There is a lot to criticize the current regime about. However, I wanted to criticize the opposition instead, because I have always wanted to get these opinions off my chest, and considering how rabid the Iranian diaspora can be, they are probably gonna flock here and comment, which is just gonna boost me in the algorithm further. I guess you could say it is a rage bait in part as well. Also, speaking of the Iranian diaspora, what really gave me the idea to make this Kaffee Klub was a couple of weeks ago when I was in Hamburg, a city in Germany, which I frequent due to it being near where I live. There was a protest organized by the Iranian diaspora in the city center, and I was genuinely amazed at the fact that there were more Israeli flags there than Iranian ones. I mean, look at these photos taken by me, absolute clown show. Genuinely, I have no idea what should be done with Iran. I know I usually have an idea about what should be the ideal outcome for a nation, but here I just genuinely have nothing. Both sides are abysmal dogshit in my eyes. I guess a military coup or something would be the best outcome. I don't know. If I'm being extremely idealistic, I would have liked to see a restoration of the Qajar dynasty, but they have died out like 100 years ago. All I know is that my favorite Iranian figure out of them all in the 20th century is Mohammed Mossadegh. Rest in peace, sweet prince, you flew too close to the sun. Anyway, on to the viewer questions from the previous episode. There are not that many this time around, so this should be a breeze. And again, if you have a question for me and want it to be answered, leave a super comment down below worth $5 or more, or do the same thing on my Buy Me a Coffee page, and I can guarantee I will answer it in the next episode. At Newfair2 for $4.99 asks, "Hey Lavader, I'm a big fan of the work you've been doing. My question is, do you have any recommendations for readings for someone who would like to get into political philosophy?" Gonna be straight here. I have no idea where to start. I think the term alone, political philosophy, is just very wide, and I personally did not start out with some reading list. I just heard about a guy, and if he was interesting enough, I read his things. If you are talking about right-wing political philosophy, I think a lot of what you might find on the Imperium Press website may interest you, and it might be a nice starting point. Other than that, unless you could be a little more specific, I don't think I really have any starting point things, since I myself never approached things in that way when I was a novice. At Pa1019 for €5.99 asks, "Who would you prefer to be restored as King of Bosnia and Herzegovina? Jinky Minus, Biggie Cheese, or Darius Belpepa?" Biggie Cheese is the only one on that list I know, so I guess him. But in all honesty, I know everyone calls me the Bosnian, but surprisingly, I as of now have not that much insight into the politics and such down there, since quite honestly, my interest is more the Western general sphere, and that is also why I basically never talk about Bosnia despite coming from there. I just don't really identify myself that much with my old homeland after I made the switch, you could say. But going off of the top of my head, most ideally it would be a Habsburg, but pragmatically speaking, it should probably remain a republic. At the Pritmaster for 10 euros, thank you so much man, asks, I would be very religious if one religion exists to feed my autism, but have you seen the churches in Germany? You have the choice between choosing the radical rainbow crowd or the Eastern Europeans. Feels like our current politics, there is nothing pro-German, just pick your poison of aligning yourself to a foreign ally. Yeah, a lot of the churches here are nice, but frequently when I am in these big cities, I see some LGBTQ church advertising, and since I live in the north, where Protestantism is the most prominent, I barely see any Catholic stuff around here. So I am much more used to see the Protestant architecture, but yeah, I agree it is sad to see the degradation. At Salvatore Maglione 6398 for £5 asks, Lavader, how should Western countries handle relations with the People's Republic of China? Also, what would be the best economic model for Western countries? While I am very right-wing, I also believe that returning to the post-World War II Keynesianist model, taxing the rich more, funding social services, nationalizing essential industries, etc. would be ideal. What would your approach be? In regards to China, I have to say that I don't have any concrete strategies on how the relations should be handled. That is not really something I have thought over, so I'll just take the dirty centrist stance here and say that the relationship should be pragmatic. However, whenever possible, and if it won't lead to anything major, relations with Taiwan should be prioritized. And as for economics, I have most definitely shifted more towards a market economy, and I believe in a flat 10 to 15% tax rate for everyone, since I am of the opinion that we should be encouraging people to expand their businesses and thus create more jobs, but a progressive tax rate just simply punishes individuals for being successful. And not to mention it will simplify bureaucratic work if everyone pays the same percentage. And that is all for today. Thank you all for listening to my rambles, and hopefully I will see you all in the next one. Thanks to all the glorious people on Patreon who are supporting me in these endeavors. Special thanks to Mudkips Our Life and SOAV for their extremely generous and high pledges. That really helps me out a lot. Anyway, bye bye!